In his will, my husband said, "You'll know when to speak." At the wedding, I chose silence. The spring rain hammered against the cathedral windows of Sacred Heart Church in downtown Boston as I adjusted my black dress and watched my stepdaughter Sarah walk down the aisle in the wedding gown that should have made this the happiest day of her life. Instead, as I sat in the second pew clutching the sealed envelope that had been waiting in my purse for 3 months, I felt the familiar weight of the secret that my late husband, Detective James Morrison, had entrusted to me before his death from lung cancer 6 months earlier. The church was filled with over 200 guests, including fellow police officers, Sarah's college friends, and members of both families who had gathered to witness what everyone believed would be a beautiful union between Sarah and her fiancé Marcus Wellington, a successful investment banker who had swept her off her feet during her final year of law school at Harvard. The atmosphere should have been joyous, but I couldn't shake the memory of James's final words to me in his hospital bed, when he had handed me this envelope with trembling hands and said, "Margaret, you'll know when the time is right to speak. Trust your instincts. And remember that sometimes protecting someone means letting them learn the hard way." If this story is touching your heart, please comment below where you're watching from. Give this video a like, and subscribe to our channel because we truly help families going through these difficult situations. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of overcoming adversity and finding strength in the darkest moments. For 28 years, I had been married to James Morrison, a Boston Police Department detective who had dedicated his entire career to investigating financial crimes and white-collar fraud cases that often involved wealthy individuals who believed their money and social status placed them above the law. James had been meticulous in his work, building cases with patience and precision that had earned him a reputation as one of the most effective detectives in the department's economic crimes unit, and his investigations had resulted in dozens of convictions and millions of dollars recovered for victims of sophisticated financial schemes. When James married me 15 years ago, Sarah was only 12 years old, still grieving the loss of her biological mother to breast cancer 3 years earlier. I had worked as a victim advocate for the district attorney's office, which was how James and I had met during a particularly complex case involving elderly financial abuse, and I had fallen in love not just with him but with his fierce devotion to his daughter and his unwavering commitment to protecting vulnerable people from predators who exploited their trust and desperation. Sarah had been initially resistant to accepting me as a stepmother, which was completely understandable given her age and the trauma of losing her mother at such a young age. However, over the years, we had developed a close relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and I had been honored when she asked me to help her plan the wedding and stand beside her as her matron of honor, especially since James's declining health had made it uncertain whether he would live to see her wedding day. The cancer had taken James quickly once it was diagnosed, giving us only 8 months from the time we learned about the tumor in his lungs until the day he passed away peacefully in our bedroom, surrounded by Sarah, me, and his closest colleagues from the police department. During those final months, James had spent considerable time organizing his affairs and ensuring that Sarah would be financially secure, having established a substantial trust fund from his pension benefits and life insurance policies that would support her through law school and into her career. What none of us had expected was the envelope that James had given me during his final week, along with strict instructions about when and how to use the information it contained. He had been working on a case involving investment fraud when his illness forced him to take medical leave, but he had continued following certain leads from his hospital bed, using his network of contacts in the financial industry to verify suspicions that had been troubling him for months before his diagnosis. The envelope contained a comprehensive investigation file documenting Marcus Wellington's involvement in a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that had defrauded elderly investors out of nearly $8 million over a 3-year period. James's investigation had uncovered evidence of forged documents, falsified investment reports, and a complex web of shell companies that Marcus had used to hide his criminal activities while maintaining the appearance of a successful and legitimate investment advisor specializing in retirement portfolio management. According to James's notes, Marcus had been operating under several different business names and had been targeting retirees in affluent suburbs around Boston, promising guaranteed returns that were impossible to deliver through legitimate investment strategies. When earlier victims began demanding their money back, Marcus had used funds from new investors to pay them off, creating the classic pattern of a Ponzi scheme that would inevitably collapse once he could no longer recruit enough new victims to maintain the charade. The investigation had revealed that Marcus was facing federal charges that were being prepared by the U.S. Attorney's Office, but the timing of the indictments had been delayed due to the complexity of tracing all the financial transactions and identifying every victim of his scheme. James's research indicated that Marcus would likely be arrested within 6 months of the wedding, meaning that Sarah would find herself married to a federal criminal who was facing decades in prison for his financial crimes. James had agonized over whether to share this information with Sarah before the wedding, but his illness had progressed rapidly, and he had been concerned about the emotional impact of such devastating news during an already difficult time as she watched her father dying of cancer. Instead, he had decided to leave the decision to me, trusting that I would know the right moment to reveal the truth about the man Sarah believed she was going to spend the rest of her life with. For 3 months after James's funeral, I had carried this burden alone, watching Sarah make wedding preparations while knowing that her fiancé was a criminal who had built their entire relationship on lies and deception. Marcus had presented himself as a successful investor who managed portfolios for wealthy clients, living in an expensive downtown apartment and driving a luxury car that Sarah believed were the rewards of his business acumen and hard work, never suspecting that his lifestyle was funded by money stolen from vulnerable seniors. The weight of keeping this secret had been enormous, especially as I watched Sarah's excitement about the wedding and her future with Marcus, who had convinced her that they would have a wonderful life together built on financial security and shared values. She had no idea that Marcus was drowning in debt from his failed attempts to cover his tracks, and that federal investigators were building a case that would destroy everything she thought she knew about the man she was planning to marry. During the weeks leading up to the wedding, I had wrestled with the decision of when and how to tell Sarah the truth. Part of me wanted to protect her from the humiliation and heartbreak of discovering her fiancé's criminal activities, especially since she had already endured so much grief and loss with her father's death. However, another part of me recognized that allowing her to marry Marcus without knowing the truth would be an even greater betrayal, potentially destroying her life when the inevitable arrests and trials began. The morning of the wedding, I had made the decision to wait and observe, hoping that something would happen to provide clarity about the right course of action. James had always trusted my instincts about people and situations, and I knew that he had given me this responsibility because he believed I would make the right choice when the moment came, even if that choice was painful and difficult for everyone involved. As I sat in the church watching the ceremony unfold, I found myself studying Marcus's behavior for any signs of the stress and anxiety he must have been feeling, knowing that federal investigators were closing in on him and that his criminal activities would soon be exposed. He appeared calm and confident as he stood at the altar waiting for Sarah, smiling and exchanging pleasantries with the minister and wedding party, giving no indication that he was anything other than a successful businessman about to marry the woman he loved. The ceremony proceeded normally through the opening prayers and scripture readings, with Sarah looking radiant in her mother's restored wedding dress, which I had helped her alter to fit perfectly. The happiness on her face was unmistakable as she joined Marcus at the altar, and I could see James's features reflected in her smile, reminding me of how proud he would have been to walk her down the aisle if cancer hadn't taken him away from this moment that he had dreamed about since she was a little girl. When the minister reached the portion of the ceremony asking if anyone had objections to the marriage, the church fell silent except for the sound of rain against the stained glass windows and the distant rumble of thunder from the spring storm that had been building throughout the morning. This was the moment that James had prepared me for, the opportunity to speak up and prevent Sarah from making what could be the biggest mistake of her life by marrying a man who had deceived her about everything important regarding his character and circumstances. I felt the envelope in my purse and remembered James's words about trusting my instincts and knowing when the time was right to speak. The evidence in that envelope could stop this wedding immediately and save Sarah from the devastating consequences of discovering her husband's criminal activities after they were legally bound together. But it would also destroy what she believed was the happiest day of her life and expose her to public humiliation in front of all these witnesses. As the seconds ticked by and the minister prepared to continue with the ceremony, I made a decision that would change everything for Sarah, though she wouldn't understand the full implications for several more months. I remained silent, allowing the wedding to proceed, but my choice was based on a realization that had been growing throughout the morning as I watched Sarah's joy and confidence in her decision to marry Marcus. During the months since James's death, Sarah had demonstrated remarkable strength and maturity in handling her grief while continuing her law studies and planning the wedding. She had shown herself to be intelligent, capable, and resilient in ways that convinced me she would be able to handle the truth about Marcus when it inevitably came to light, and that attempting to protect her from that truth might actually undermine her ability to develop the skills she would need to navigate the challenges ahead. James had always believed in allowing people to learn from their own experiences rather than trying to shield them from every possible mistake or difficulty. And I realized that his instruction to trust my instincts was also guidance to trust Sarah's strength and judgment. If she was going to discover Marcus's true nature anyway when he was arrested, perhaps it was better for her to face that revelation as a married woman who could make her own decisions about how to handle the situation, rather than as someone who had been protected from making her own choice about her future. The ceremony continued with the exchange of vows, and I listened as Sarah and Marcus promised to support each other through good times and bad, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. The irony of those words was not lost on me, knowing that their marriage would be tested by circumstances that neither of them could have imagined when they wrote their personal vows about building a life together based on love, trust, and shared dreams for the future. Marcus's vows spoke eloquently about his commitment to providing for Sarah and protecting her from life's uncertainties, promises that rang hollow given my knowledge of his criminal activities and the federal investigation that would soon destroy the facade he had carefully constructed. However, Sarah's vows reflected genuine love and optimism about their future together, and I found myself hoping that her strength and character would be enough to carry her through the trials that lay ahead. The reception was held at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Boston, where over 200 guests gathered to celebrate what everyone believed was the beginning of a wonderful marriage between two young professionals with bright futures ahead of them. I moved through the crowd making conversation with relatives and family friends, all the while carrying the weight of knowledge that would have changed the entire atmosphere of the celebration if it had been revealed earlier. During the dinner portion of the reception, Marcus gave a speech thanking everyone for their support and expressing his love for Sarah and his gratitude for being welcomed into the Morrison family. He spoke movingly about James's influence on Sarah's character and his own commitment to living up to the standards that James had set as a father and husband, words that were particularly painful for me to hear knowing the truth about Marcus's character and activities. Sarah's maid of honor speech was filled with memories of her friendship with the bride and optimism about the future that Marcus and Sarah would build together. She spoke about Sarah's resilience in overcoming the loss of both her parents and her determination to build a career in public interest law that would honor her father's legacy of fighting for justice and protecting vulnerable people from those who would take advantage of them. The dancing portion of the reception provided me with an opportunity to observe Marcus more closely, watching for any signs of the stress he must have been feeling about his precarious legal situation. He appeared to be enjoying himself, dancing with Sarah and mingling with guests, but I noticed that he seemed particularly nervous around the police officers who were attending as friends of James's family, avoiding extended conversations and excusing himself when the discussion turned to current cases or recent investigations. Late in the evening, as the reception was winding down, Sarah approached me with tears in her eyes to thank me for all my support during the wedding planning process and for being such an important part of her life during the difficult months since her father's death. She expressed her gratitude for the way I had stepped in to help with details that her father would have handled, and she told me how much it meant to her to have my blessing for her marriage to Marcus. That conversation was one of the most difficult moments of the entire day, as I struggled to respond appropriately to Sarah's thanks while knowing that I was withholding information that could have prevented what might prove to be a disastrous marriage. However, I also recognized that my decision to remain silent had been motivated by respect for Sarah's autonomy and confidence in her ability to handle whatever challenges lay ahead, even if those challenges would be more severe than she could imagine. 3 months after the wedding, my phone rang at 6 o'clock in the morning with news that would validate my decision to trust Sarah's strength while also confirming my worst fears about Marcus's criminal activities. Federal agents had arrested Marcus at his downtown office on charges of securities fraud, money laundering, and operating an illegal investment scheme, with additional charges expected as the investigation continued to uncover the full extent of his financial crimes. Sarah called me an hour later, her voice shaking with shock and disbelief as she tried to process the reality that her husband of 3 months was facing federal criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. She had been awakened by FBI agents executing a search warrant at their apartment, seizing computers, financial records, and other evidence related to Marcus's investment business that she had believed was legitimate and successful. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my life, as I made the decision to tell Sarah about the envelope that James had left for me and the investigation that had uncovered Marcus's criminal activities months before the wedding. I explained James's reasoning for not wanting to burden her with this information during his final illness, and my own decision to allow her to make her own choice about her future, even though I knew it would lead to heartbreak and difficult times ahead. Sarah's initial reaction was anger and hurt that both her father and I had kept such crucial information from her, particularly given the magnitude of Marcus's deception and the impact it would have on her life and career. She felt betrayed by our decision to withhold evidence that could have prevented her from making what now appeared to be a catastrophic mistake in marrying someone whose true character was completely different from what he had presented. However, as the reality of her situation began to sink in, Sarah also began to understand the impossible position that James and I had been placed in by Marcus's deception. She recognized that revealing his criminal activities before the wedding would have been devastating in a different way, destroying what she had believed was her chance for happiness, while she was also dealing with grief over her father's death and uncertainty about her own future. The divorce proceedings began immediately, with Sarah filing for annulment based on Marcus's fraudulent misrepresentation of his character and circumstances. The legal process was complicated by the federal criminal case, as many of the assets that Sarah had believed belonged to her husband were actually stolen funds that would need to be returned to Marcus's victims as part of the restitution process mandated by the court system. Sarah's legal training proved invaluable as she navigated the complex intersection of criminal and civil law that governed her situation, working with attorneys to protect herself from any potential liability related to Marcus's crimes, while also ensuring that she could rebuild her life without being burdened by debts or legal complications from their brief marriage. Her strength and competence in handling these challenges confirmed my belief that she was capable of dealing with even the most difficult circumstances life could present. The federal trial began 8 months after Marcus's arrest, and Sarah testified as a prosecution witness about the lies he had told her regarding his business activities and financial circumstances. Her testimony was powerful and emotional, describing how Marcus had portrayed himself as a successful investment advisor helping clients build secure financial futures, when in reality he was stealing money from vulnerable seniors who trusted him with their retirement savings. During the trial, additional details emerged about the scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise, including evidence that he had been planning to use money from Sarah's trust fund to cover some of his losses and extend the life of his Ponzi scheme. This revelation was particularly painful for Sarah, as it demonstrated that Marcus had viewed their marriage not just as a cover for his criminal activities, but as a potential source of funds to continue defrauding other victims. Marcus was ultimately sentenced to 22 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $8 million in restitution to his victims, effectively ensuring that he would spend the majority of his remaining life behind bars. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized the devastating impact of his crimes on elderly victims who had trusted him with their life savings, and the callous nature of his deception in maintaining a facade of success and respectability while systematically stealing from vulnerable people. 2 years after the wedding that I had attended while knowing the truth about Marcus's criminal activities, Sarah graduated from Harvard Law School with honors and accepted a position with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office specializing in elder abuse and financial crimes prosecution. Her personal experience with Marcus's deception had given her unique insight into the tactics used by financial predators, and she was determined to use that knowledge to protect other families from similar victimization. During Sarah's graduation ceremony, she gave a speech about the importance of resilience in the face of unexpected challenges and the value of learning from difficult experiences rather than being defeated by them. She spoke about her father's influence on her decision to pursue a career in public service and her commitment to continuing his legacy of protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit their trust and dependence. At the reception following graduation, Sarah approached me with a letter that she had written expressing her gratitude for the difficult decision I had made on her wedding day. She explained that the intervening months had given her perspective on the impossible situation that James and I had faced, and she had come to understand that our choice to allow her to marry Marcus, while painful in its consequences, had also been an expression of confidence in her strength and ability to handle whatever challenges life presented. Sarah's letter acknowledged that discovering Marcus's true nature after the wedding had been devastating, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about trusting her instincts, conducting thorough due diligence in all important relationships, and recognizing that some people are capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions that can fool even intelligent and educated individuals. These lessons had made her a more effective prosecutor and a stronger person overall. 3 years after that spring morning when I chose silence instead of speaking up to prevent what appeared to be a disastrous marriage, Sarah was promoted to senior prosecutor in the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division and had successfully prosecuted dozens of cases involving elder abuse, investment fraud, and other financial crimes targeting vulnerable populations. Her work had resulted in millions of dollars in restitution for victims and lengthy prison sentences for perpetrators who had believed their sophisticated schemes would protect them from consequences. The foundation that James had established years earlier to support families of police officers continued to operate under Sarah's leadership, expanding its mission to include assistance for victims of financial crimes and educational programs designed to help elderly individuals recognize and avoid common fraud schemes. Sarah's personal experience with Marcus's deception had informed the development of these programs, ensuring that they addressed the psychological and emotional manipulation tactics that financial predators use to gain their victims' trust. During a recent family dinner, Sarah reflected on the events of her wedding day and the decision I had made to remain silent despite knowing the truth about Marcus's criminal activities. She expressed appreciation for the way that experience had shaped her understanding of the complexities involved in protecting people from their own decisions while also respecting their autonomy and right to learn from their own experiences, even when those experiences are painful and costly. Today, 5 years after the wedding where I chose silence over speech, Sarah is engaged to a fellow prosecutor whom she met while working on a complex white-collar crime case, and their relationship is built on the foundation of shared values, mutual respect, and complete honesty about their backgrounds and circumstances. Sarah's experience with Marcus had taught her the importance of truly knowing someone before making life-altering commitments, and she had applied those lessons in developing a relationship based on genuine transparency and trust. The sealed envelope that James had entrusted to me remains in my possession as a reminder of the difficult decisions that sometimes face families when protecting loved ones requires balancing their immediate happiness against their long-term well-being. James's instruction to trust my instincts had proven wise, as the experience had ultimately strengthened Sarah's character and prepared her for a career dedicated to protecting others from the kind of deception and financial predation that had briefly destroyed her own life. The wedding that should have been the happiest day of Sarah's life had instead become the beginning of a difficult journey that tested her resilience and strength in ways that no one could have predicted. However, the woman who emerged from that experience was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to use her talents and knowledge in service of protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit their trust and dependence for personal gain. Looking back on that rainy spring morning in Sacred Heart Church, I still believe that my decision to remain silent was the right choice, despite the pain and difficulty it ultimately caused for Sarah. James had been correct in his assessment that I would know when the time was right to speak, and my instincts had told me that Sarah needed to discover Marcus's true nature on her own terms, in her own time, so that she could develop the strength and wisdom that would serve her throughout the rest of her life and career. The trust that James had placed in me to make that impossible decision had been both a burden and an honor, representing his confidence in my judgment and his love for Sarah's long-term well-being over her short-term happiness. The lesson that emerged from that experience was that sometimes protecting someone means allowing them to face difficult truths and learn from painful experiences, trusting that their character and resilience will carry them through challenges that initially seem insurmountable. If this story has touched your heart, we would love to hear from you. Please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you are watching from, as well as your thoughts on family dynamics like this. Every perspective matters, because stories like these remind us that while families may face struggles, challenges, and even heartbreak, there is always an opportunity for healing, connection, and growth. By sharing your own reflections, you not only add to the conversation but also create a ripple effect of encouragement for others who may be experiencing something similar. When you engage a Euro, whether eat a Euros through commenting, liking, or subscribing a Euro, you are helping us build a space where families can feel less alone and more supported. Many people silently carry burdens within their homes, and often just hearing that someone else understands can provide an enormous sense of relief and hope. This channel is more than a platform for stories. Eat a Euro is a community where resilience, compassion, and solidarity take center stage. Your support allows us to continue creating and sharing content that uplifts, inspires, and shines a light on the very real challenges that families go through. We believe that even in the most difficult circumstances, there are lessons to be learned and strength to be found a Euro, and together, by engaging with these stories, we can remind one another that no family has to navigate their journey in isolation. So please, If this message resonates with you, don't hesitate to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you are not just supporting us, you are standing with countless families around the world who find courage and comfort in knowing that they are part of a wider circle of understanding and care. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping us continue to share these powerful stories of resilience and hope.